Imagine living next door to a serial killer. He mows his lawn on weekends, he waves at you in the morning, he drives to work in Manhattan, designs buildings for a living, and comes home to his wife and children every evening. He is, by every measure, a normal man. But behind closed doors, for 17 years, he was hunting women, killing them, and then going back to his normal life like nothing happened. His name is RexHeuermann. He is 62 years old. He is a former architect from a quiet suburb on Long Island, New York, and he is accused of being one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. For over a decade, his victims lay in the cold ground near a stretch of beach while investigators searched for answers. The cases went cold, families buried empty caskets, the world moved on. Until a pizza crust changed everything. Tomorrow, April 8th, 2026, RexHeuermann walks into a courtroom and is expected to finally say the word that his victims' families have been waiting years to hear. Guilty. This is the full story of the Gilgo beach killer, how he lived, how he killed, how he was caught, and why this case is far more complicated than it appears. To understand how RexHeuermann operated for so long without detection, you have to understand who he appeared to be. Heuermann grew up on Long Island and built a career as a successful architect. He ran his own firm in Midtown Manhattan, RH Consultants and Associates. He was known professionally as competent and experienced. He had worked on high-profile commercial projects across New York City. He lived in Massapequa Park, a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in Nassau County, the kind of place where neighbors know each other and crime feels distant. He had a wife named Asa Ellerup and 2 children. By all outward appearances, he was a devoted family man. What nobody knew was that for nearly 2 decades, Heuermann had been living a second life, one built around predation, control, and violence. His victims were young women, most of them involved in sex work, who were reported missing across the New York area. The youngest was just 20 years old, the oldest was 28. They had names, families, and futures. Sandra Castilla, Valerie Mack, Jessica Taylor, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello. 7 women, killed over 17 years, and for most of that time, not a single viable suspect. The case that would eventually bring Heuermann down began not with a tip, not with a confession, but with a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert. In 2010, Gilbert disappeared after fleeing from a client's home in Oak Beach, Long Island. Police searched the area near Gilgo Beach to find her. What they found instead would shock the entire country. Hidden in the brush along Ocean Parkway, investigators discovered multiple sets of human remains. One body, then another, then more. By the end of the search, remains connected to 10 victims had been found across the area, some dating back to the early 1990s. The discovery made national headlines, but despite the attention, the investigation stalled. Years passed, tips dried up. The Gilgo Beach murders became one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in American history. Then, in 2022, everything changed. A renewed joint task force took a fresh look at the evidence. Investigators focused on a Chevrolet Avalanche pickup truck that had been spotted near the scene of one of the disappearances. They traced the vehicle, and it led straight to RexHeuermann. Detectives began quietly surveilling him. They followed him, they watched him, they waited. Then, Heuermann discarded a pizza crust in the trash outside his office in Manhattan. Investigators recovered it. They extracted DNA from it and matched it to DNA from a hair on one of the victims' bodies. That pizza crust was the beginning of the end. In July 2023, RexHeuermann was arrested outside his Manhattan office. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stood before the court and pled not guilty. But prosecutors were not finished. In 2024, 4 additional charges were added, connecting him to the deaths of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Jessica Taylor, Sandra Castilla, and Valerie Mack, whose disappearances stretched as far back as the year 2000.
7 victims, 7 charges, and a man who continued to insist he had done nothing wrong. Here is where this case stops being just a murder investigation and becomes something deeply disturbing. When investigators searched Heuermann's home and devices, they found something that nobody expected. Files on his computer, and these were not ordinary files. Prosecutors described them as a blueprint for the killings, a series of detailed checklists, reminders to himself about how to carry out murder without getting caught. Notes about limiting noise, instructions on how to clean bodies, steps to take to destroy evidence and avoid leaving traces behind. He was not acting on impulse. He was not losing control. He was organized, methodical, and deliberate. He treated murder like a project, the same way he might approach designing a building. That discovery fundamentally changed how investigators and the public understood him. This was not a man who snapped. This was a man who planned. And then, just hours ago, on April 7th, 2026, the day before his expected guilty plea, another bombshell dropped. The son of one of his victims, Valerie Mack, filed a wrongful death suit in Suffolk County State Supreme Court. The lawsuit names not only Heuermann, but his ex-wife, Asa Ellerup, and their daughter, Victoria Heuermann, as defendants. The lawsuit alleges that at some point, members of his family knew about, concealed, or deliberately ignored evidence of what he was doing. It also claims the family earned over $1 million from a documentary that gave access to their home and story. Asa Ellerup's attorney has strongly denied the allegations, but the question now echoing across the true crime community is impossible to ignore. Did anyone in that house know? Heuermann fits a very specific criminal psychology profile, what behavioral scientists call the organized, mission-oriented predator. Unlike disorganized killers who act impulsively and leave messy crime scenes, Heuermann was controlled. He selected victims he believed were vulnerable and less likely to trigger immediate investigations. He operated over a long period of time, which speaks to his patience and his confidence that he would never be caught. The blueprint files are particularly significant from a psychological standpoint. Writing down instructions for committing murder suggests someone who not only planned their crimes, but felt a need to control every detail. It may also reflect a form of psychological compartmentalization, the ability to completely separate the monster within from the professional suburban family man on the outside. Criminologists call this the mask of normalcy. It is what allows some of the most dangerous individuals in history to live among their neighbors for years, even decades, without raising a single alarm. What ultimately brought Heuermann down was not a dramatic confrontation. It was the smallest possible thing, a discarded pizza crust. It's a reminder that no matter how carefully a person constructs their mask, the smallest crack is all investigators need. I want to hear your thoughts on something that has been dividing the true crime community since this arrest. The new lawsuit claims that Heuermann's family, his ex-wife and daughter, may have known what he was doing, or at the very least, looked away from signs that something was deeply wrong. So here's my question for you. If a family member discovers that someone they love is a killer and they say nothing, should they face criminal charges? Is silence the same as complicity? Or is there a difference between knowing and being able to prove it? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. I want to say something about the women at the center of this case, because in too many true crime conversations, the killer gets the attention and the victims become footnotes. Sandra Castilla, Valerie Mack, Jessica Taylor, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello. 7 women killed over 17 years, and for most of that time, not a single viable suspect. Tomorrow morning, Rex Heuermann walks into Suffolk County Court, and after years of claiming he did nothing wrong, after watching prosecutors build a case against him piece by piece from a pizza crust to a digital blueprint, he is expected to finally say guilty. But here's what keeps me up at night. 4 other families are sitting at home right now, waiting. Their loved ones' remains were found on the same stretch of beach. their cases are still open, and if there is no trial, there may be no public airing of evidence, no cross-examination, no full public reckoning with what Rex Heuermann did. What does justice look like for them? I will be covering every development from tomorrow's hearing the moment it breaks. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, because this story is not over. It is only just beginning.